Nearly 300,000 of you watched my last video on prehab exercises, which is why today I'm releasing part 2 of my Bulletproof Your Body series. Last time we talked about how movements like these, the big lifts, help you to get strong and jacked, while movements like these, the little lifts, help you to stay fresh and resilient and enable you to keep training hard over time. But even the little lifts need to be progressively overloaded over time, just like the big lifts, if you want to keep making gains. In this video, I'm going to go over my top 7 advanced prehab moves that I do in my training that have made a massive difference in my ability to stay pain-free and injury-free. Let's get right into it. Move number 1 is the shortened to lengthened calf raise. All right, before I begin talking about the shortened to lengthened calf raise, I actually want to talk about shortened and lengthened bicep curls. Now, shortened and lengthened exercises are actually pretty common in the bodybuilding world, but we're going to apply it to the prehab world coming up. But before we do that, let me just explain this. So a shortened version of a bicep curl is going to be a preacher curl like this, where my arm is out in front of me and I'm contracting my bicep. The lengthened version is going to be something like an incline curl. So where I'm here, I'm sitting down, now my arms are behind me, and now my biceps are on stretch, and I perform my bicep curl this way. Both variations are going to be really important, so you want to be able to do exercises that not only train from just like a standard range of motion, but you also want to be able to do it from a shortened position or a lengthened position. And I thought, why not take some principles that we've learned from the bodybuilding world and apply it to the prehab world? So in a second, I'm going to set up here for shortened to lengthened calf raises. All right, right now my calves are in a fairly neutral position. If I want to be in a more shortened position, I can just step forward a bit and lean back and have my shins pointing backwards a little bit. If I want to be in a lengthened position for my calves, I can just step back a little bit, lean forward, and suddenly my calves are in a more lengthened position. All right, so let's take those principles that we learned from bodybuilding and apply it to the prehab world. We're gonna do a shortened calf raise, followed immediately by a lengthened calf raise. All right, so this is what this looks like. You're gonna grab onto a squat rack like this, or a door frame, anything along those lines. And you're going to lean back like this, okay? So now my calves are in a more shortened position, and then from here, I'm going to do my calf raise, and I'm gonna think about kind of lifting up diagonally backwards, all right? So I'm gonna go through my calf raise and really try to contract my calves and then come back down. Contract my calves and come back down. Now, the first time I did this, I started cramping up right away. I've been doing calf raises my entire life, but the first time I did the shortened calf raise, I got a massive cramp in the top of my calf here, and it was a really intense feeling because my body hasn't been exposed to that position before and utilizing the calf in a shortened position. So I think this is gonna be super important for anyone looking to get resiliency in their calves and Achilles, all right? So again, we're being in this sort of leaning back position, and I want you to really focus on flexing your calves firmly at the top, and then not only that, really trying to get your heel, as close to your calf as possible. We're trying to shorten this distance as much as possible. You're gonna get a ton of benefit throughout your Achilles and also your calf as well. Now, what I like to do is get 3 sets of, let's say, 8 to 12 reps, and then immediately after those 8 to 12 reps, I lean forward and get into a more lengthened position. And then from here, I get as many reps as possible from this lengthened position. And when your calves are lengthened, or when any muscle is lengthened, you're able to utilize that stretch a little bit, and it helps you from that bottom position. Whereas the shortened position, you don't have that stretch, so it's a little bit more difficult. So that's why I like to place the lengthened version after the shortened version, and that makes it a little bit of a smoother drop set to attain. Move number 2 is the adductor side bend. All right, now in my last video for the adductors, we went over Copenhagen planks from a short lever, a long lever, as well as dips. This video, we're gonna take it up a notch with side adductor bends off a 45-degree back extension machine. All right, so if you have one of these at your gym, it's gonna be great. I have a home version called Nordex from Shogun, but basically what I'm gonna do is anchor one leg in the leg attachment spot, and then from there, I'm gonna lay on the side, or lay on my side on the machine. All right, now from here, what I'm gonna do is place my hand on my hip, and I'm gonna try to let my leg swing out equally as my torso drops down. All right, so I'm gonna come down and I'm really thinking about my inner thigh, my adductor, eccentrically working to keep me in a pretty neutral position as I come down. And now once I get to the bottom, I again use my adductors to pull myself up concentrically. All right, so now you can see how this is a lot more range of motion than the Copenhagen, so it's a lot more dynamic. Plus I'm using some pretty long levers to achieve the motion. Now, if you want to make it even more challenging, you can actually use a loaded system by grabbing onto a dumbbell or a kettlebell or anything along those lines. All right, now from here, I'm gonna tip to the side and then come all the way back up. And the whole time I'm really thinking about my adductors joining in on the action. All right, now in addition to that, you're gonna get a ton of core benefit, ton of adductor benefit. You're gonna feel a lot of great stuff with this exercise, but make sure that you master the Copenhagen plank first before attempting these. Now for this movement, I like anywhere from 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps or so. Move number 3 is the side plank with banded abduction. So last time for the abductors, we went over lateral band walks. This time we're gonna add a little more load to the equation by dropping down to the floor in a stable position and do a side plank with banded abduction. All right, so I'm gonna drop down into a side plank, and this is almost like a reverse Copenhagen because we're trying to work the opposite musculature. We're trying to work the abductors rather than the adductors. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start in the bottom of a side plank. I'm gonna lift up into a side plank and simultaneously raise this top leg. And let me show you what that does. So as I come up, I lift up and simultaneously lift this top leg up. And then I come back down, dip down, before coming back up again. All right, so what's happening here is not only am I getting the bottom glute, but I'm also getting the top glute as well. So as I lift up, I get glutes on this side, my abductors on this side, and then I also get abductors because my legs are banded together and I'm getting that abductor to work and fire to lift that band up. So this is a really challenging movement that works both sides of the glutes in a very loaded fashion. All right, so let me show you again. Now, if I wanted to take this up a notch even further, I can elevate my feet. So I'm doing a decline side plank with banded abduction, or I can simply use a more difficult band. So I could use a tougher band resistance. Or if I want to regress the movement a little bit, I can be like this and get into my side plank and then get into kind of like a clamshell position as I perform the movement. So you can easily modify and progress this as you need, but you're gonna find this much more challenging than the lateral band walk. For this movement, I like 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps. Move number 4 is the closed chain resisted hip flexion. So in our last video, we went over band resisted hip flexion, and it was an open chain exercise where I was laying on my back and I was bringing my leg back and forth. This time, this is closed chain where we're more anchored in place and my hip flexor is gonna be working eccentrically and concentrically to stabilize the movement. All right, so let me show you what this looks like. You're gonna be sitting at the edge of a bench and you're gonna anchor your foot, your working side, underneath a dumbbell or whatever you have available, like a dumbbell rack, anything along those lines. And then from there, this leg is gonna be up and you're gonna cross your arms like this. Now from here, you're gonna slowly lower down. So it ends up becoming kind of like a core and hip flexor exercise. You're gonna slowly lower down and then slowly pull yourself back up. Now, unlike regular crunches where you're trying to take the hip flexors out of the movement a little bit and you're trying to keep mind-muscle connection on the abs, I want you to focus on mind-muscle connection on your hip flexors. So right up along this hip crease here. So as you're coming down, you're thinking about the hip flexor contracting to make sure that you slowly and controlly lower down. And then on the way back up, you're thinking about the hip flexors contracting to pull yourself back up. All right, so let me show you one more time. I'm here, I cross my arms like this, and I come down, and then I pull myself up. All right, if I want to make the movement a little bit harder, I can go hands behind my head, I can go arms overhead, or I can even go weighted. I can have a plate right here as I go through the movement. But let me show you one more rep like this. Ooh, that's challenging. And then come back up. All right, so again, this is a closed chain version of a hip flexor exercise. It's gonna be much more challenging because you're really moving your body weight all throughout space and your hip flexor has to work that much harder. For this exercise, I like 3 sets of 5 to 6 reps on each side. All right, move number 5 is the Jefferson curl. All right, now back in our last video for the lower back, we went over Supermans, which cover a pretty small range of motion. In this video, we're gonna go over Jefferson curls, which cover a much greater range of motion. Now, lower back training has been controversial because back in the day, we used to think that the lower back had to be perfectly neutral all the time. So deadlifts, planks, squats, we never wanted to have the lower back get 1 degree of range of motion in either flexion or extension, otherwise we thought the spine would explode. But then later on, we realized that in everyday life, in athletics and sports, your back is never really neutral. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's in extreme ranges of motion like flexion or extreme degrees of extension. And it makes sense to train your body in those positions to make sure that it's prepared for those situations in everyday life and in athletics. So let's take, for example, if you are moving furniture, you're never gonna be in a position where you're moving and your back's gonna be perfectly neutral because objects in life you're trying to move are gonna be awkward and clunky. It's not gonna be a perfect bar with weights perfectly positioned on each side. So you're gonna need to be in these positions where you're kind of hunched over, trying to stabilize as you're walking down the stairs. And that's how people blow out their backs when they're moving furniture or simply just bending down to pick up something that could be even really light because they're not training and exposing their bodies to these positions. All right, so I'm gonna go over the Jefferson curl that allows you to do just that. Now, Jefferson curls also get a bad rap because you see on social media all the time, people Jefferson curling with 225 pounds, 315 pounds. Today, we're gonna start body weight and add a kettlebell for resistance. All right, but let's start body weight. We're just gonna do a forward fold. So we're gonna be right here. I'm gonna think about tucking my chin to my chest and then slowly lower down 1 vertebrae at a time on the way down, and then unraveling 1 vertebrae at a time on the way up. So this thought process really makes it so that you're really curving your spine as much as possible and then unfurling it on the way back up. Okay, so we don't want to treat this like a yoga style forward fold where you're like really hip hinging with a neutral spine. We want that range of motion. All right, so I'm gonna be right here. I'm gonna come down. And then just unravel myself on the way back up. And again, you're just gonna notice that I'm really trying to flex and curl as much as possible, not necessarily trying to achieve perfect form by really hip hinging. All right, now if that feels comfortable for you, you can use a kettlebell or a light dumbbell for resistance. All right, so I'm gonna be right here, same concept. And just lower myself down, slowly, 1 vertebrae at a time, lower, 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 and then slowly unfurl myself all the way back up. All right, so I'm getting a lot of benefit with the Jefferson curl. Not only am I getting tissue tolerance in my lower back, I'm getting strength in my lower back muscles. I'm getting lengthening through the posterior chain. I'm getting a lot of great benefits by doing this movement. And we want to think about where's the line where people start to say that the Jefferson curl is a bad exercise, because this is a Jefferson curl. When it's body weight, it's just a forward fold. When you use a light dumbbell or a light kettlebell, that's probably okay too. But if you get stronger and stronger, there's no reason why you shouldn't keep loading it heavier and heavier if you feel comfortable and confident in doing it. So the Jefferson curl is just a great way to get resiliency throughout your lower back. For this movement, I like 3 sets of around 6 to 8 reps or so. Move number 6 is the open half kneel kettlebell press to windmill. All right, in our last video for the rotator cuff, we attached a band to the squat rack and performed a 90-90 external rotation. And I really like that exercise because your arm is floating out in space and your rotator cuff has to work really hard to stabilize it out in space as it's stabilizing the movement. This time we're gonna take things up even further by doing an open half kneel kettlebell press to a windmill. All right, so it's gonna really up the ante. So let's go through that movement. So basically what you're gonna do is get down into a position where you're in this open half kneeling posture. You're gonna have the kettlebell on one side like this. And the first thing that you're gonna do is press directly overhead. After you press directly overhead, you're gonna send your hips back into this sort of a lateral hip hinge position and perform a windmill. So I'm coming down here and then I'm coming back up. All right, now there's a lot of things happening here. I really like the kettlebell because it offers a little more instability than a regular dumbbell. So if I'm using a dumbbell, it's equal on each side. So it's pretty supported as I'm going through my pressing movement. But because I have the kettlebell behind me here, it introduces an element of instability, and now my rotator cuff has to work that much harder as I'm going through the pressing movement. And then not only that, as I'm going through this movement, in everyday life, in athletics, your arm isn't just going straight up and down, it's moving off to the side, it's in all sorts of different planes of motion because your shoulder is a ball and socket joint. So it's responsible for a lot of ranges of motion. So we don't want to just think about training the rotator cuff, training the shoulder by just doing these very simple movements, simple rotational movements. And this is where the windmill comes into play. So as I'm going through the windmill, I'm getting T-spine rotation, I'm getting neck rotation, I'm getting shoulder stability, I'm getting lengthening through my pecs. There's so much going on as I'm going through this. And not only that, I'm integrating my shoulder with my core and my trunk. So there's a ton of great benefits that happen by training the windmill pattern. So let me go through that one more time. I'm here, I press, then I go through the windmill, and then I come back up. If I want to progress this, I can press, come down, and then go all the way down to my forearm here. So this is even more range of motion that I have to cover here. And then I come back up. Now you could go through straight sets of windmills, but I find that it actually becomes a little bit too fatiguing on the shoulders, and I like the press in between to sort of reset a little bit, and I feel like I can do more weight and I can do it for more reps. For this exercise, I like 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps on each side. And finally, the 7th movement is the goblet floating heel squat. All right, now the concept of the floating heel would have been blasphemous back in the day. So in the 90s, in the 2000s, 2010s, every time you heard about squats, deadlifts, compound movements, it was always about hips back. Keep your weight on your heels. Make sure your knees don't come too far forward. Make sure your knees don't go past your toes. And there's a lot of talk about just overemphasizing the posterior chain. These days, we're now introducing floating heel work because of the carryover it has to, again, everyday life and athletics. If you think about picking up something off the floor, you're rarely gonna think about, let me just sit my hips all the way back and then come down perfectly neutral position. You're probably just gonna come down, let's say it's a heavy package, you're probably gonna come down and do something like this, where your back is rounded and your heels are lifting up. This is much more effortless and it gets your center of mass closer to the object. So it just makes more sense. You wouldn't try to pick up a heavy package like this. So you would get close to it, come down and pick it up like this. And we realize that in sports also, let's say you are cutting or moving aggressively, you're probably gonna be on the balls of your feet if you are a good athletic mover. You're probably not gonna be back here because then you're gonna be kind of stuck in this position and not able to react effectively. And so floating heel work helps to address those concerns. All right, so for the floating heel elevated squat, what you're gonna do is basically get into a standing position, your squat stance position, and you're going to perform a calf raise. And this time, you're gonna hold this calf raise as you perform your squat. So this in itself is actually difficult to coordinate and stabilize because now you're just on the balls of your feet as you perform the exercise, all right? Now, so if you haven't done floating heel work, this would be the first place to start. You can even use something for support as you go through the movement if balance is an issue. But then later on, as you get more and more proficient, you can use a load like a kettlebell or a dumbbell to go through the movement as you come down. All right, so I'm here, my heels are elevated as I'm coming down, and then I come back up. All right, because my heels are elevated, my weight is now more shifted forward and I have more tension on my quads and more tension on my knees. This is gonna, over time, help to build resiliency around the knees, help build strength in the quads, and really get your knees in a more prehabby, bulletproofy way. All right, so I really like the heels elevated squat for that reason. And not only that, let's say I'm in the bottom position here, not only am I getting the quads and the knees, but in this position, I'm getting a lot of stability throughout my ankle, my foot, my calves, my Achilles. They're all working together to stabilize the movement. And the best part is, just like the Jefferson curl, as you get stronger and stronger, you can load it up with a barbell. I've seen people do 315-pound floating heel squats, and just imagine how strong their knees are, how strong their quads are. This is just a fantastic movement for the knees as long as you build up to it over time. For this movement, I like 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 8 reps. All right, that's all I have for you today. Those are my top 7 advanced rehabilitation moves that I do on a weekly basis to make sure that I feel my best. Incorporate 1 or hopefully more of these into your routine and you'll quickly notice a significant difference in your stability, joint health, and overall resiliency. If you're looking for more workouts that combine strength, mobility, and athletic performance, check out our free guide, Sustainable Strength. It includes a sample week of workouts to help you train smarter. You can find the link in the description box below. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe for more content just like this, and let us know in the comment section down below what you'd like to see from us in the future. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.